All right, everybody, welcome. If you're watching on Facebook Live, good for you for being very resourceful. And thank you again for your patience as for day one of our conference, we're just trying our best with bringing our virtual content to you. And if you're not watching on Facebook Live, but you're watching this on YouTube later, welcome to We Represent Conference. This is actually panel 2, talking about the experience of critical language scholarship and Boren Awards alumni, or should I say alumnae, as we have a panel of lovely women, some who have done combinations of actually other programs as well, like Fulbright. So it'll be a very interesting discussion later today. So just to introduce our panel, we're going to talk a lot about experience, personal experience, as an American in your country of study, and then just the program itself, as some are very structured, like critical language scholarship, and some of them could be self-designed, or you participate in a flagship institute, for example, in Boren. So to briefly introduce our panelists, Cheyenne is calling in from Washington, D.C., like I am, and so is Amber, actually. Cheyenne is the Strategic Partnerships Manager for the Education Partner Program at HubSpot. And Amber is a National Security Analyst with the Department of Justice. And tuning in all the way from Singapore is Anissa. Thank you so much, Anissa, for waking up early to be here with us and to share insight. She's currently the Research and Advocacy Manager at Stewardship Asia Center, but she also has some roots in DC as she went to American University for undergrad. Actually, she went to American for her master's, sorry. But both, actually, right? That's what I thought. I was like, I could have sworn Anissa said she was in BA when we met. But Anissa and I actually did critical language scholarship together in 2016 in Indonesia. And it was actually her second CLS, and she'll probably talk a little bit more about that during her remarks. But yeah, so we're going to actually jump right into our discussion today. And then let's see, we do have some attendees into Zoom. Thank you so much for your patience and for persevering on November. I really, really appreciate it. Don't forget to submit to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be either typing our responses throughout the conversation or we'll actually answer your questions live during our conversation. I also want to say thank you to Sean, our tech host, Vanessa, our tech co-host, and I also really want to give a big shout out to Jeff from the Boren, actually. So it's amazing that we have actual staff here to answer, more technical questions. So thank you everybody for attending. So to actually get started, Amber, we're going to have you start first. And if you could kind of bring us to where you were in life and what kind of motivated you to apply for Boren, like what you were studying at the time, your career goals at the time, have they changed in terms of where you are now? Kind of what were you interested in professionally or academically, if you could talk about that. And then Anissa, you'll share next, and Cheyenne, you'll go after that, just to kind of do a longer narrative self-introduction.
Yeah, hi, thanks. And thanks everyone for coming to our panel. For me, I did undergraduate at Howard University in DC. And when I was there, I was actually majoring in psychology, but I was towards in the end of my senior year, I really realized I loved doing international affairs and traveling internationally. And so the idea that I could work internationally was an amazing concept, which was actually brought to me, well, not brought to me, but I was kind of enlightened by the honors program there in the College of Arts and Sciences, COAS. So my last year there, I applied for the Wrangell Fellowship, which is a program that will, if you get it, you will basically State Department pays for your grad school, and then you will work for State Department as a Foreign Service officer. I did not make it. I didn't get the Wrangell Fellowship. However, at that point, it was already set. I'd applied to all these grad schools. This was what I was planning on doing. And so I accepted an attendance to the Maxwell School at Syracuse University, where I studied international relations, security studies with a focus on East Asia and foreign policy. So I was actually finishing up my career there when a friend of mine in the undergraduate program mentioned to me that she was doing a Boren scholarship. And I was like, what is this thing? I must know more. They pay for you to go overseas and learn a language. That sounds like something I should know about. So she actually told me a lot about hers and what she had to do in the application process. And I started looking it up then. So it actually was a year later that I finally decided that it came around again where I could apply for the Boren Fellowship. And I knew already I wanted to focus on Asia. So I applied to go to Japan, learn Japanese. And I'd always planned to work for the federal government anyway. So knowing that I would have a hiring preference after completing my Boren was just icing on the cake for me.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's awesome you applied for Ringle. I also applied for Ringle, didn't get it, but I'm on my way to go to Middlebury and Monterey to study international education management, pretty on brand, and public administration. So Anissa, if you could unmute yourself and you can go next.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining and for We Represent for having me. So for me, CLS, I did CLS Indonesia in both 2015 and 2016. My background is in environmental policy is what I did my master's in, and then my undergrad was international relations. So although like I always was motivated by sustainability and growing up in Malaysia, especially like for the first 9 years of my life, really kind of shaped my love for the region. But going to Indonesia for CLS, I was really motivated because coming as Indonesian American, I really wanted to refine my skills. It's quite funny, I was learning Arabic in college as an undergrad. And then when I came to applying for CLS and I went to my advisor, I asked them, what do you recommend? Arabic, Indonesian? It's quite a difficult scholarship to apply to. And probably the best advice I got was, maybe you should refine the language that you know and grew up speaking before heading and jumping into another one. And from there on, I think I just like stuck with it and I haven't gone back. So with CLS, and then after post grad from my master's degree, I did a Fulbright research grant in Malaysia. And that's kind of what brought me to Singapore right now. I was working and presenting some of my research at a conference, and it just happened that my future employer was there watching. So for anyone that's looking to do CLS, Boren, Fulbright, you never know who's going to hire you. So always put yourself out there. But yeah, and then I got to Singapore, and now I work with companies that want to lead a more well-stewarded life, and we help organizations do that. And so I'm part of the sustainability team that does that now. So kind of worked in a good line.
What a journey, Anissa. And I'm so glad we've crossed paths and now we can virtually cross paths again. So before moving on to Cheyenne, just a reminder that this is conversation format for our experiential session, whereas nuts and bolts, I see many of the attendee names were from our previous session. That was just more informational. So please don't hesitate on asking. We have guiding questions, but we allocate a time to kind of incorporate specific or general questions about our experience. And Cheyenne, if you could go now.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity to join. My favorite thing in the world is to talk about my CLS and Fulbright experiences. So this is really, really cool. It's also really cool to see how many connections the other panelists and I, like we all have. It's like we've been on these same journeys, but studying very similar things, doing similar things in the same areas. But yes, so again, my name is Cheyenne Boyce. My decision to actually do the critical language scholarship was very much a culmination of my experience doing the Fulbright program, which I did the opposite of Anissa. I did Fulbright. I was an English teaching assistant in 2015 in Malaysia, and then I was a critical language scholarship recipient in 2017 in Indonesia. And so essentially, long story short, I had always been interested in international things. I went to Spelman College. I studied international studies and Japanese studies. So I was very used to learning languages. I spent like 8 or 9 years studying Japanese. So that was always sort of on the side. It was like, okay, I like languages. I like East and Southeast Asia. So then I came to graduate school. I actually studied international peace and conflict resolution. When I got there, my focus was international development. I ended up going to do my Fulbright. was working in Malaysia, got very interested in cross-cultural exchange programming and youth development, and was focused more on the education side. I came back to American University where I was doing my master's, decided to change my concentration. I said, international development is not it, but education is. So I'm going to do education, going to focus on cultural exchange programming and how we use those as conflict mediation tools. And that actually includes all of these programs that, you guys are learning about at the conference. So these are all cultural exchange programs, soft power diplomacy programs. And so I was looking at how those programs are a part of the conflict mediation process. And so I, was finishing my master's, ended up working for a different State Department program that was called the Indonesian U.S. Youth Leadership Program. It was 28 students, some from Indonesia, some from the United States. They did an exchange back and forth, and I was the program coordinator for that. So during that time, I, had all of this amazing experience in Malaysia, and then I got to work with all of these amazing Indonesian students. And so I was just convinced that this is where, I needed to be. This is where I wanted my research to focus on. And so I was finishing my master's and, was looking for what to do next. I had just had this experience, working with students. And so I figured the opportunity to do a critical language scholarship would give me the sort of just a bit more legitimacy in terms of me wanting to do this work. Like I had the regional expertise in terms of like, I've gotten a whole master's degree. And at this point, I, have done a lot of studying and working in the area, but being able to really use the language to not just communicate in Indonesia, but also in the region, was going to be really important for me. And so I decided to apply for the critical language scholarship. Ended up getting it, did the program there, had a great experience. And yeah, I can continue on and tell you guys later what ultimately happened with the story. I have gone on to work for Chinese cultural exchange programs, and now I'm working at a tech company doing education, more DIMB work in education. But ultimately, the critical language scholarship did prepare me for all of these opportunities, and I'm happy to share more about that as our discussion continues.
That is such a wonderful and very international, especially Asia focused, but very international journey you just shared, Cheyenne. Thank you. So as we're talking first about our application journey, and then I'll be asking panelists to talk a little bit about their post-program and kind of career development after completing their program. Cheyenne and Amber, I really wanted to ask a little bit about your application process when you were at Howard and Spelman, respectively, like, your network, the fellowship advisors, leaning upon your peers, what other kind of resources? Since, I went to GW, Anissa went to American. I know, we also have another American alumna, but just kind of talking about more minority serving institutions, because I know we have a ton of attendees who are very interested in that specific kind of experience. And applying is the first step. Amber, do you want to start first?
Sure. So the program I was applying for while I was at Howard clearly was not Boren because I was an undergrad. But I did apply obviously for the Rangel scholarship fellowship. And actually it was interesting when I learned about it at Howard, because actually the Rangel office, the headquarters in DC, is on Howard's campus at the Ralph Bunche Center. I had no idea. I did not know that it was there. I didn't know we had like such an access to the international world right there from campus. And that could have just been because I was not focusing on that for my career, for my studies at that point. But once I found out about it, they came to the presentation to one of the programs I was involved in. They were immediately helpful. I remember very clearly still something which I appreciate so much for those people for. I had planned to I had already bought tickets to go on my final spring break trip at the same time when I was supposed to be writing the essay for the Rangel Fellowship. And you're supposed to do it, in the office with everybody. And I was not going to be in town. And I was like, is there anything we can do, anything I can do? They're like, okay, we'll let you write it. We'll let you come in early that morning. No one else in the office. You have to finish in the same amount of time. And that's it. And they were just very helpful. And also the fact that I was on campus, I could go and talk to them and ask them questions. They had everything in their lobby. If you haven't visited the Ralph Bunche Center and you're at Howard or NDC, highly recommend. There's pamphlets for all of these programs we're talking about here at this conference right there in the center. And those folks can answer so many questions for you. that is my recommendation, Cheyenne.
Yeah, and a quick follow-up, I know that the DC or the Mid-Atlantic Diplomat in Residence also has an office at Howard. And so for any attendees who are in the region or actually go to Howard or are alumni of Howard, that's an incredible resource. You can make office hours appointment, just walk across campus to go to the office, whereas people at GW, American, Georgetown, UMD, elsewhere, have to kind of trek over there and fit it into the schedule, or just wait to talk to the diplomat in residence at an event, now virtual, but of course, in-person events still bring you around town. There is also a network of diplomat in residence, DIRs, across all the United States, and they do have time for you individually, and they also have information sessions where they talk about a lot of these fellowships, whether they're Wrangell and Pickering, which is Pathways to the Foreign Service, or kind of helping you hone your essays, or kind of like careers and academic strategy to get you through, your academic, or I shouldn't say academic, when you're eligible as a student for some of these fellowships like Boren and CLS to help you be a more competitive candidate. So thank you, Amber. And then Shannon, if you want to talk a little bit about your resource network and your application experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just have to second and third everything that Amber and Helen have said about the Bunch Center. Before I took my current job at HubSpot, I actually was the director of program development for the Confucius Institute U.S. Center. So I was basically running U.S.-China cross-cultural exchange programs for 4 years. And I worked with the Bunch Center often. Tania, Hope Navis, Moreno Montgomery, Lily Lopez, the folks over there are amazing, and they will get you what you need to know in terms of, applying for these programs and just using their connections to make sure that you're the best, the best fit and are able to submit the best application that you can. So definitely encourage reaching out to them if you can. And in general, I just, my advice is to find the people on your campus or in your respective area that are the advisors for these programs, and really just get in communication with them. Make it very clear that you are interested in this program, why you're interested, and being very authentic about your reasoning. Like, I looked back and read my critical language scholarship essay, and I was like, wow, I said what it was I wanted to do, at the time. Obviously finishing grad school and getting into, my career, things have shifted a little bit. But at the time, I was very clear and authentic about why this program was going to be meaningful for me. And I really stood in that. And I know that that was something that was really helpful for me when I was applying for Fulbright. For Fulbright, there are Fulbright program advisors. So if you're interested in that program, you can definitely reach out to them. They'll help you. Critical language scholarship, they also have advisors of a sort. I personally didn't have to really be in touch with that person as often, because when I applied for CLS, I was finishing graduate school. I had already done Fulbright. I had started to build my network in DC, and I kind of was a bit more familiar with applying to these types of programs. So I didn't need to, work with somebody step by step. But even though I didn't have to go, set up meetings with the advisor on American's campus, I did let them know that I was applying. I wanted to make sure, people knew that my name was someone that you should look out for. And I think that's just general advice for any sort of competitive grant, fellowship experience that you're trying to get into. You have to let people know that you're interested in doing it, and make sure, your name, who you are, isn't sort of like forgotten along the way, because there's a lot of people applying. So you have to figure out ways to stand out.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne. Another quick tip is for many of State Department and DoD's programs. Well, actually, I'm not sure about Boren, but I do know for critical language scholarship, you're able to actually look at colleges and universities. You can type in your school, and it'll actually tell you by year, by program name, if you happen to know who you're looking for. And there's actually a really good resource for connecting with prior alumni. Just one example, during Anissa and I's year in Indonesia for CLS, there were 2 other GW students. And I know that their names are Beth and Sawyer. The 3 of us have been contacted by younger students who have come after us being like, hey, what was your experience like? Obviously that's petered off a little bit since we did it in 2016, but just being on that list, being a resource, especially for lesser commonly taught languages that also aren't taught at GW, for example, is a huge resource. And if maybe at your school you don't have a lot of alumni, for CLS or for other programs, you could still look up schools, neighboring schools in your region, because they're likely to cross paths with you in a consortium, in an internship, or just be available in the community. So that's another resource to look into. So that's a bit about our application experience. We have gotten a few questions already, but we're going to try and collate them for later. Because right now we're going to actually talk about our program, our during program and post program experience. And Anissa, I'd love to lead off with you. Like I mentioned, you did CLS twice. So, what caused you to apply again? What did you do between the two CLSs that, that you think made you a competitive, candidate to be selected again? And then I'd just really love to hear what you're doing in Southeast Asia. You've done Malaysia, now you're in Singapore, you've done Indonesia. What's it like?
Yes, and I'm sure that you and Cheyenne can both attest to this. The CLS program, and particularly in Indonesia, is just a phenomenal experience. The staff is great, the friends you make on the program, like I still talk to Helen. Like some of these things you just can't get away from. And the program itself, like after the first year, I was like, oh, I definitely have to come back for more. So in the second year, the first year was kind of eye-opening experience for me. It's the first time I had ever learned, as a heritage speaker, especially learning a language that you grew up just speaking colloquially in a classroom is a very different experience. So in that first year, I was able to really adapt. And then my second year, I kind of like went all in. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And then that second year is what really kind of projected my language abilities. So at the time I had been using Indonesian pretty frequently. I speak it with my family like almost every day. So that made it quite simple and easy to use. But I also like the one thing that I really like want to stress is that if you're not using the language, you really will get lost. And even for me, like my family speaks a more local dialect. And my family's from Sumatra. So the program itself is actually very Java centric and based in Java for anyone that's interested in CLS Indonesia. So for me, the best thing was like, when I came back to DC after my first CLS, all I tried to do was like look for ways that I could use my language. So I volunteered with US Indo, which is an organization in DC that has a lot of like bilateral partnerships and multilateral partnerships with other organizations. So I volunteered. I even like managed to snag myself an internship at the Indonesian embassy. So just trust me, I think if you're in DC, it's quite easy. So in a lot of other cities, you may have some difficulty with some of these languages that aren't spoken, but there's always a way. So I think for me, it's like when I came back from CLS, I was like really motivated to like figure out how to use my language, and it really helped. So when it came to applying for Fulbright, I was like, well, the one thing that they don't tell you when you apply to CLS is, and then when you are hoping to apply for Fulbright is they try to recommend, and this is the word of mouth kind of advice that I've gotten, that if you spent way too much time in the country, in your host country, you're less likely to get Fulbright in that country. I don't know, Cheyenne, if you can also echo this. Like that's just something that they tell you. And so Fulbright Indonesia, I was kind of out. I'd spent way too much time. So Malaysia was the next best thing. And it was a phenomenal experience as well, since the languages are quite similar. And my research was actually based on palm oil, which is what I was doing at American University. I was studying environmental policy and sustainable and equitable development of palm oil in the region. So being in Singapore actually wasn't too far-fetched for me. So after my Fulbright, when I was really like, I will say that I really used my Fulbright. I was doing my research. I really used it to get a job. And I don't know, Cheyenne, if you also had this experience, but I was already thinking like 6 months into my Fulbright, like, man, how do I use this to like stay in the region? And I think like if you're really motivated, you will find a way. I packed up all of my things from DC when I moved to Malaysia, and I was like, this is happening. I'm gonna make this work. So kind of like crazy. But I will say if you have that kind of mindset, you will find a way. So Singapore like was the perfect fit. I think for me, it's really just, I've been able to use my Indonesian language skills still, not as much as I'd like to, since Singapore, everyone speaks English here. But the experience itself, I think, has really propelled me to try to find new ways to like work within the region as well. I will say I'm quite lucky in the current job role that I have. It's flexible and I can try to find new ways to make partnerships and things like that. Like Helen said, I work in research and advocacy. So I kind of like towed a line between conducting sustainability research and also trying to find ways to make partnerships in the region with other organizations. So yeah, sorry, Helen, that's a huge tangent, but.
Oh, that was very well connected and good pro tip. We do have it in good word that your tip about Fulbright is true, but it does not apply for Boren. And it makes sense, since Boren, it's very much about national security. And speaking of, well, actually, we'll talk about, I don't want to get too ahead, but Cheyenne, I do want to wrap up CLS with you, talking about the program experience. You also did Indonesia. We have great representation here, and your post-program experience. And then we'll get to Amber with Boren.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, definitely echo a lot of what Anissa said. The program is amazing. The way that the team for CLS in Indonesia, that the way that they're able to really take me, somebody who did not have any Indonesian experience, and get me from novice to, I think I finished my test at intermediate advanced in 2 months is truly mind-blowing to me. And so, I think that if you're thinking about the CLS program, know that it is a program that is really going to help you learn a language very fast. And so you have to sort of be prepared to manage that along with, just some of the challenges that can come with being abroad in the first place. So, the CLS program is very much a microcosm of the United States. You get a little bit of everybody from everywhere all together for 2 months in a very sometimes intense, space. And I think, those are sometimes just the challenges of being abroad. And so I think I have done a lot of like comparison between my Fulbright experience and my CLS experience, and in terms of what that taught me sort of about myself. So I can definitely say that after CLS, in addition to helping me learn the language, it really did help me begin to build the network that I needed to be able to thrive in DC in terms of, like Anissa said, looking for a job. And it was like, well, I have all of these connections. I have all of these people who are well connected in these different areas. How am I going to leverage that to make sure I'm taking the steps, that I want to take in my career? And yeah, it was really helpful. It's so interesting because I did like my final project for CLS was actually, I got connected with some grassroots environmental organizations actually, and I did so very similar to Anissa, and I did an analysis of basically like a band that used their music to speak out about social and environmental justice issues. And so I had done all of this work and I was super into that. Thought that at the end of it, I ended up taking a job doing the US-China cultural exchange programs. And so at the end, I was like, oh man, I did all of this work, like, darn. And I'm like, is it going to ever matter? Crazy thing, finished, working for the Chinese organization. Now I'm at HubSpot working more on education work, like I said, with DIMB and technology. But I also just accepted an offer to teach an adjunct class at GW about soft power and cultural diplomacy. So all of that is to say, you never know how these things are going to ultimately connect. CLS, if you do decide to do the program, is going to be one piece of your very large career path, journey, international, experience. And so I do think that if you apply for the program and you take advantage of it to its full extent and you really, get everything that you can out of it, all you're going to be able to do is take that and use it for your next, your next venture, regardless of if it's in that target language or not. And then you never know how it's going to pay off in the long term. So I do think that all of these programs are great preparation for building and creating whatever it is that you think you want to do. All of us on the panel, right? Like all have a lot of tangential connections and we all are kind of in the same space, but doing things that we all love and really enjoy in our own respective fields. And so, yeah, that's just my final thought, I guess, on the program.
Huge congratulations on that teaching position, expanding your CV. That's awesome. And one thing I do want to highlight, it's actually a really good transition actually to Amber's, response about Boren. following, well, let me just put it this way. We had the Indo-Pacific pivot, right? And then we had an administration change. And right before the administration changed, many of State Department programs like Fulbright, CLS, Gilman, so forth, along with Peace Corps and AmeriCorps and other programs that already had non-competitive eligibility, now had NCE. So as I mentioned in the previous session, if you were here, hello to some of the attendees. And if you are just joining us, NCE is a special hiring pathway that kind of gives you a leg up in the automated candidate ranking system, but it also helps you land interviews, which really is how you're going to advance in usajobs.gov, which is it is a very complicated application process. But speaking of NCE, which has long existed for Boren, Amber, do you want to talk a little bit about your Boren experience? What was the national security issue you applied with, or if it's not the same that you're working on now, if you're allowed to comment on it, kind of what are your national security interests, your regional interests, and then what have you done with your required national service since?
Yeah, as in point out, Boren is different from CLS and Fulbright actually. And actually, before I go into my program, I want to point out that many campuses have Boren representatives on campus there to answer student questions. So if you're interested in applying for Boren, check to see if your campus has someone there just for this. So for my program, funny enough that Helen mentioned the pivot to Asia, that is when I applied for Boren. And that was actually what I discussed in one of my essays. It was during the Obama administration pivot to Asia. And I had been studying Japanese for a few years. I studied it all through college at Howard. I was president of the Japanese Culture Club, yes, at a HBCU with a bunch of Black students. But it was, so I had been, studying the language for a while. And so having the opportunity to apply to go overseas to, be there for such a long period of time, which for the Boren was wonderful for me. So yeah, I applied saying I was going to do I believe it was a 9-month program, 9 or 10 months. And Boren is also very intensive. Actually, I believe Jeff was the one who actually contacted me after my application to make sure I was doing enough hours per day of language study in the program that I had written up about. I will say too, for Boren, the thing that I really liked about it that I recommend for applicants, you kind of get to design the program. So if you're still in school and you're also going to take other classes, like technically you can do that, but it's very focused on language. So if like for me, I had basically finished my graduate studies. So I found a school that would let me do classes it was generally 3.5 to 4.5 hours per day. And I also contacted a human rights organization in Japan telling them I was going to be there and I wanted to be able to intern with them if they had openings. And that was just me taking that initiative. So that's a very high recommendation for if you're trying to do a Boren. You have to be able to take initiative because you will be the one designing your program. You will be the one there more or less by yourself because you are not going there with a huge cadre of other people. Your timeline is your own. It's not really connected to others, which I loved. So I was at Boren. I did Japanese classes 3.5 to 4 hours a day. I interned working with a Japanese human rights organization where we were writing, we were talking about other things happening in the Asia region, and it gave me the opportunity to actually work in a foreign country. So when I came back to DC, ready to work for the government and fill out my service, I was hoping to work on Asia issues, and I believe it actually did help. When I was first hired on for the Department of Justice, I was hired on to work cyber issues as they relate to Asia. Now I had no cyber experience, but plenty of Asia experience. So I'm assuming that is why they offered me that position. So it was great. I don't much work on that now. Now I work more on counterterrorism issues. But I'm hoping to switch back over to doing more Asia stuff and hopefully, use the language, which I continue to study in my own free time with the Japan American Society of Washington, D.C. Like if you're interested in doing Boren and you have this crazy idea about a thing you want to study or you want to also intern or do anything like that, you can make it happen.
That's awesome. It's very empowering and also very exciting to kind of see that path. But yes, pivot to the Indo-Pacific, we can see quite the representation here just with our regional background. And with that, actually, we're going to segue into audience Q&A. Again, reminder to attendees who are in Zoom. Unfortunately, on Facebook, we cannot see your comments, but some of our attendees have been actually asking about some of the things we talked about, and we have some very exciting questions up ahead. So we had a question from Nicole that was asking about prior study abroad experience. Does it help or hurt your chance of getting one of these scholarships? And our awesome Boren representative, Jeff, already answered that for Boren. Amber, you're still welcome to pitch in with some tips. And again, a reminder to attendees who are watching in Zoom, you can go and open your Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and actually see a bunch of the questions we've already answered, just typing. But we will also be verbally discussing some of the questions we're answering live. So Anissa and Cheyenne, and then Amber, I'll let you think about if you want to build off of Jeff's typed response. Any tips or just kind of suggestions or even like ways of thinking about being a competitive applicant? Some people, for logistical reasons, financial reasons, other reasons, just haven't been able to get abroad yet, but still really want to apply to these, fully funded opportunities to go abroad. So Nicole wants to know if prior experience, studying abroad does help, but conversely, what if someone doesn't have that experience? How can they still be competitive? Anissa, I see you nodding a lot. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can. It's quite funny. I came to CLS because I heard about Nestle when I was in high school. And I don't know if you other, like, I see Cheyenne also shaking her head, like, so I applied for it. So Nestle, for those that don't know, is that basically the CLS version for high schoolers. And you can do a year, you can do a summer, semester for pretty much the same languages almost that CLS offers. Not the breadth that CLS offers, but kind of the main ones. Indonesia is now on that list. So we've pushed through. But I will say that if you don't have any country experience or abroad experience, that will never hurt you with CLS. And I think that's just an attestament to that they really want people to learn these languages, because these aren't languages that you'll normally see in like a classroom or at your university. So everyone really does get the opportunity. And I can only attest to like my cohort and like for both years. And I know Helen and Cheyenne are also shaking their head. You meet people from so many different backgrounds. My first year, we had someone who had never been out of the country before. Like while they were in college, we had like PhD applicants, we had people like former vets on the program. So I think like for CLS in particular, your intent is probably the most important thing. So if you're really passionate, you're really motivated, and you really make your case for why this language will help propel your career and your interests, regardless of your degree. We had people from arts degree, someone from like a STEM background. So I think that's something that
Divinity school.
yeah. Divinity school. Oh, that's true. So I think like people have this perception, and probably from this panel as well, since we're all IR focused, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case for I think any of these. Maybe I can't speak for Boren, but I know for CLS for sure, they really look for people that will bring diversity to your cohort. So definitely don't feel like if you're not an IR person or studying security that this won't be a fit for you. Like as long as you want to do the language, like they will, and you make your case, like then you have a chance.
Cheyenne, anything you want to add on?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think a lot of the, the program officers, the people filling, these slots for these programs, they are looking for people who are going to help make the cohort, diverse, and who are also not just diverse in like ethnic background or, gender diversity, anything like that, but just diverse ideas and concepts. And so if you are, I think in the chat is like psychology sciences or nursing or some of these other, fields, if you can make the case for why not only learning this language, but why having this cultural exchange experience is going to be beneficial for you, then I think you are right on track. And I would also say one of the things that I think that I was able to do in my application that maybe helped is not only talking about like what I was going to gain from being in Indonesia and, why this experience was going to be valuable for me, but also what I wanted to share, so it really is an exchange. And I think sometimes people aren't always thinking about it that way, but just as much as you receive from the program, you also want to think about what you are willing to give, whether it's to your host family or to the tutors that you're working with or whoever that you'll be coming into contact with. You really do become a representation of the United States and some American values and things like that. So if you have a perspective on how you would like to share that with people abroad to help give a better understanding of America and American culture, then I think that's something you definitely want to include as well. Hopefully you guys heard that. There's sirens in the background, but if you have more questions, put them in the chat.
Thank you both for sharing that insight. Really good tips. And also just like, it's really a mindset. Again, if you don't apply, you'll never even have a chance to be considered to actually go. And if you'll psych yourself out now saying, oh, I don't have experience, you can really be creative with it and think about how to frame yourself as a competitive applicant, which is actually our next and probably final question. If there are any straggler questions, please do submit them now. We'll try to fit them in. But we have questions from Myra and Dylan talking about how to be a competitive applicant. Amber, I'm wondering if you have anything you want to share about how you differentiated yourself or your application from the pool of other applicants. Anissa and Cheyenne, I already know you both touched a lot about environmentalism, which is STEM, but also talking a little bit about how maybe either of you were able to differentiate yourself or be able to kind of craft this narrative that ended up playing out as we see in our remarks when you were applying. Yes, Amber, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I really think my application stood out because I feel like it was very clear I was prepared. Like I said, I had decided almost a year in advance to apply for Boren, and Boren is well known for being, pretty competitive for who they decide to give. I mean, they're giving you thousands of dollars to go in a country and learn a new language. So they kind of want to make sure you're gonna actually do that and that you're prepared to do that. So for me, I really believe it was because I was already studying exactly what I want to do for my future. I made that clear in the application. I knew exactly how many hours per day. I knew which language level I was hoping to reach with my study. And I also had already contacted the program I wanted to intern with, the Human Rights Organization. I had contacted them myself, and I noted in my application that I already have approval from them to work for them or to intern for them because you can't get paid while you're boring. So I had already contacted them and got their approval. I had, had a personal PLC for everything. So I believe that was kind of something that was that helped my application a lot, being very specific and knowing what I wanted, knowing what I wanted to get from Boren.
And then Anissa or Cheyenne, anything you want to add on from like the CLS perspective or even just from your personal experience?
I mean, I'll just say something quick. I think to be a competitive applicant is it's also subjective. Like, I think if you really make the case for yourself on, like Cheyenne said, I think the ideas that you bring, maybe you don't have the experience, you didn't intern a lot, or the job experiences you have may not be directly related. I think CLS is quite open from my experience in seeing my fellow cohort. Like, if you can really make the case for why you will continue to use this language, I think people, and like Cheyenne said, it's kind of that give and take. Like, yes, you're spending all this time with this community, but this is something also, and not for CLS, but for Fulbright, I really took into consideration because of CLS. When I was doing my Fulbright, I was like, okay, they just funded me thousands of dollars, like Amber said. How can I not only do research, take this experience, use my language, but also give back to the community? And what can I share with them? So for me, I think I was in a unique position when I was doing CLS in that I came from a very different region of Indonesia and spoke a very different kind of accent and dialect. So I really kind of pushed that forward in my application and said that as a heritage speaker and there may be some like attendees on this panel that are heritage speakers and want to apply for any of these languages, the key is really just to how you can continue this language. My first CLS year, there was only me. My second year, there were 5 heritage speakers. So I think that that's just something that with a lot of these languages, you will also see. So you can really make the case for the continuation of the language, regardless of your experience. That will be like really key for you.
Thank you, all of you, for your insight. And as we come down to the last 30 seconds, I want to just quickly recap some of the questions we've answered by typing, for people who are watching on Facebook and also in the chat. And so we had one question talking about Korean, studying Korean, but also having, a non-traditional international affairs major, which, again, could actually make you quite competitive with a STEM or public health background. But Jeff, our Boren representative, reminded us that CLS does have some minimum requirements for some of their languages. And also CLS offers a much smaller pool of languages, whereas Boren has flagship institutes, which are very structured. And then you can also just apply for Boren with your own program of study. So sometimes you can actually go for Boren first, get that experience as a novice student, and then apply for CLS to do that really intensive summer program. Another thing to address, someone asked about if CLS is only in the summer. Technically, yes, though, of course, with COVID, we did have some fall virtual institutes, but I would imagine that is very much the exception. So to please plan your summers accordingly. I also wanted to highlight, let's see, we also really wanted to highlight that for Boren, it's very important that you connect, your application, all your essays, your proposal, and national security topic to your career, and again, how it connects to national security writ large. So these are all things to consider when you're applying. And then let's see. First, again, apologies to our Facebook attendees, but for our Zoom attendees, make sure to read some of the typed responses for directed questions. And I want to just thank everybody again, Sean and Vanessa, for our tech co-hosts, Amber, Anissa, and Cheyenne, for your amazing insight. And Jeff, for your amazing insight as well, and also being the expert Boren, source of knowledge. And again, we have a survey. I just posted it to the chat, a completed survey, and the URL is custom to each session. We'll enter you into a raffle drawing. And also when you click out of Zoom, it can also come up as a pop-up. And with that, we're actually going to conclude because we'll be starting our third panel. So thank you again, everybody. Take care.